Welcome in to One of One Sports. We just had, another upset-filled weekend of college football, so it's time to give our college football Week 10 analysis and takeaways, starting off with the biggest game from the weekend, and that was, of course, Ohio State defeating Penn State 20-13. And before we get into the specifics of the game, we just got to point out there were so many external things here with the coaches. The whole James Franklin, his record against Ohio State, his record against top teams, and another chance to get over the hump. And then on the Ryan Day side, proving that, you just spent so much on NIL this year. You were, hyped to win the national title. You've already got a loss to Oregon. You can't take another step back and lose to Penn State. And they got the win. But getting into the game here, I feel like whichever team had won this game, you were going to talk about these key plays. If Penn State had won, Ohio State was going to look at Will Howard, and I was going to come on here and talk about how once again, Will Howard let the team kind of cost them the game with a pick six and fumbling at the one. Not to rip him, but those are two massive mistakes that if Ohio State had lost this game, you would have pointed back to. And Penn State losing this game, you got to point at obviously the goal line stop at the end of the game, but then the other goal line stop getting the interception at the end of the first half, and which was not on Drew Hall. The receivers got to catch that pass. But two huge plays that you can point at is these were the pivot points in the game. But I think, if you look broader, you realize, okay, each team had basically two of those, right? Penn State had the goal line, got stopped on the goal line, interception in the end zone. Ohio State had the pick six, fumble at the 1 yard line-ish out of the end zone, right? So you think about that, it kind of breaks even that way. And what this actually came down to, and not just talking about these pivot point plays that really kind of cancel out, is Penn State not being able to stop the run. You look at Ohio State so far this year, really struggled running the ball. As recently as last week against Nebraska, I think they only 64 yards rushing, and been very disappointing, right? Because they have Travion Henderson and Quinshaw Judkins, who are supposed to be maybe the best running back duo in the Big Ten, competing with Penn State, maybe in Oregon you throw in there. Michigan is pretty good at running back, but I digress. And so you look at how Penn State's been stopping the run. They've been really good. The defense overall has just been really good. And I don't know how many times on this broadcast you had Joel Klatt pointing out that Ohio State had a makeshift offensive line and Donovan Jackson was playing out of position for the first time. And he's going up against Abdul Carter. And, I thought all this was a recipe for Ohio State going to have to lean on Will Howard, throw the ball. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate going to have to get open, beat these Penn State corners and DBs, kind of like what they did with Marvin Harrison the past couple of years, just torching Penn State in the defensive backfield. I thought they could maybe do that again with Egbuka and Smith, and that would be how they would win, because I did expect them to win. But they didn't even have to. They just ran the ball fairly well against Penn State, especially to close the game out. Just running out the last 5 minutes of clock was extremely impressive and kind of concerning for Penn State. And we'll talk about what this means for Penn State more towards the end of the video. But this was a huge chance for them to finally, if you were to advance to or improve to 8-0 and beat in Ohio State, you're locked for the playoff. Pretty much, you're looking like you're going to go to the Big Ten title. You're looking like a true national title contender. And you brought in Andy Kotelnicki, who, more to talk about that. He was supposed to improve this offense, and he had for most of the year, but now it looks the same as it always has against Ohio State. More on Andy Kotelnicki. I was pretty disappointed by how he used Tyler Warren especially, but just when they played USC on the road in what was their other big game this year, obviously USC hasn't been very good since then, but at the time it seemed like it was a pretty good team, big game. And he pulled out all the stops. I mean, he used Tyler Warren at quarterback, at running back, at O-line, snapping the ball. All these trick plays and combinations to beat a USC defense that's not nearly as good as this Ohio State one. And then against Ohio State, using his Dairy Queen analogies, this looked like no toppings, right? Just straight vanilla, I was very surprised. I thought he was going to have a bunch of creative play calls. And, it was here and there. The Tyler Warren quarterback play that took the run down towards the end was a big one. But it was like, why'd you wait the whole game to finally use Tyler Warren? So that was just confusing and frustrating. Watching the game, I thought they could have been more creative in play calling. And I thought they should have been because, you only scored 13 points. You could argue like they had two other chances to score, but that's another thing. They didn't have good enough play calling in the red zone, especially down there inside the 5-yard line. But yeah, so that's Ohio State, Penn State. Now we can move on to right, wrong. The first team I want to talk about that was right about was the South Carolina Gamecocks. And not like perfectly nailed this because I thought 44-20. I didn't think South Carolina could put up 44 points on A&M. I predicted I think like 23-17. I thought it'd be more low scoring. It was 20-20 at halftime, but then they shut out A&M in the second half, which was very impressive. But this was more of just, gauging A&M off a big win, going on the road, tough environment, young quarterback. I didn't think it was a good spot. And then South Carolina gets the jump early, going up 14-0. And then they're up 17-6. But then A&M's able to take the lead 2017 before half. And I'm like, South Carolina might have blown their chance. But then they tied at the half. And after halftime, just rolled them. And, at the end, it wasn't like I said, it's 2020 at halftime. 44-20 kind of overstates how big the gap was between teams, because at the end, Marcel Reed, I think, fumbled one, and South Carolina kind of tacked on some late touchdowns where the game was in hand, but still, beating A&M, top 10 team, or were they top 10? I don't know, but, really the only undefeated team in SEC play, just coming off a big win against LSU, shutting them out in the second half and winning by 24 is really impressive, and, so the fourth quarter, they scored 2 more touchdowns in like the final 4 minutes. But it was clear that South Carolina outplayed A&M, and that was something I was right about this Saturday. Something I was wrong about, however, was Indiana. I put them on like high upset alert. I picked them to win still, but I was pretty concerned. I thought it'd be a close game, and they hadn't had any close games or even trailed, so I didn't know how they'd respond in a close game. And when they got down 10-0, I was like, yep, here it is. This is what I was talking about. And then they proceed to score 47 straight points, absolutely rolling Michigan State. Upset was nowhere to be seen. Curtis Rourke was back. He looked great. Aiden Childs turned the ball over, I think, a couple times. And it looked like what they've been doing to pretty much everybody. And this team looks really, really good. Later this week, we'll do like a college football playoff rankings, what I think they should look like. Spoiler alert, Indiana is going to be really, really high. And I was definitely wrong about how they would perform this weekend. Final thing I was right about, though, well, there's more I was right about. But Vanderbilt defeating Auburn 17-7. This was just a crazy line by Vegas, setting this at Auburn -7. Well, that's saying Auburn is like roughly 4 points better than Vanderbilt on a neutral field, which is just crazy if you've watched these teams play this year. It is so obvious Vanderbilt is better and should be favored on a neutral field. I don't care about what the preseason said about these teams' talent profiles. Watch the games. We're over halfway through the season. Auburn should have never been a favorite over Vanderbilt, which I know it sounds crazy, but that's just how it is. And then Diego Pavia owns Auburn, and he owns the state of Alabama. Beat Alabama this year, beat Auburn this year, and when he was at New Mexico State, beat Auburn. So, you should never favor Auburn over Diego Pavia. So I don't know what Vegas was doing here. 7-point underdog for Vandy. Easy upset call, in my opinion. And yeah, they defeat Auburn 17-7. Moving on to the most surprising teams of the weekend, and we can start off with number 3, Nebraska, and this is surprising in a bad way. You lose to UCLA 27-20. Yes, Dylan Raiola ends up going out at the end of the game, but you were already trailing 27-7 when he was in there. And I thought after the response against Ohio State, I thought this was a team moving in the right direction after the Indiana loss. And to lose at home to UCLA, who's one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, was very surprising and very disappointing. And this was a team that was 5-1, ranked in the top 25. People were celebrating what the job Matt Rule had done. Nebraska fans are like, we're finally going to make a bowl game for the first time in 8 years or whatever it is, the longest drought of not making a bowl game in the FBS, I believe. And now it's in jeopardy because you're sitting at 5-4 with USC, Iowa, Wisconsin. The way Iowa's playing, they're playing a lot better than Nebraska. Wisconsin and USC are playing at about the same level as Nebraska. So I think you got to get one of those to make bowl eligibility. But yeah, just the UCLA. If you can lose to UCLA at home, you can definitely lose to those other teams. So yeah, it was really, really surprising to me that Nebraska was going to lose this game. I thought for sure they'd get that 6-win mark this weekend. But number 2 is the Houston Cougars beating Kansas State. And if last week hadn't happened, this would probably be number 1 because Houston had been playing really, or Kansas State had been playing really well. And then Houston, I didn't think was a good team at all. But after last week where Kansas State nearly went down to Kansas and Houston was able to beat Utah, there was kind of this sense that, okay, Houston's playing better and Kansas State's kind of playing with fire. So you can kind of see it potentially happening. Obviously, I still didn't think it would. That's why it's number 2 or most surprising here. But what was really, really surprising was how they just kind of stifled Kansas State's run game. Kansas State been one of the best running teams in the country with DJ Giddens and Avery Johnson at quarterback. And Giddens was the leading rusher with only 50 yards. He was outrushed by Houston's quarterback. So how they were able to stop Kansas State's run game was really impressive to me. And then having a comeback win, being down 19-10 and going 14-0 in the fourth quarter. So you were the one with the comeback. Like you got down and fought back and upset the better team was really impressive, but more so surprising to me to see from Kansas State. And that's why they're the number 2 most surprising team from the weekend. But without a doubt, the most surprising team of the weekend was the Louisville Cardinals. They defeated Clemson 33-21 in Death Valley. And I mean, this was shocking for a number of reasons. One, Clemson's at home. They're the better team. Usually the better team wins their home games, right? But aside from that, the scheduling dynamics of this game really favored Clemson as well. I believe, let me double check this real quick. I think Clemson came off a bye. Yeah, they did. So Clemson's off a bye at home, and Louisville is coming off maybe their toughest stretch of the season, just playing Miami and then on the road at Boston College on a Friday. So, I mean, Miami and Clemson within 3 weeks, pretty tough. And Louisville's bye week was way back, I think, in week 3. I don't think they've had one since then. So Clemson's way better rested at home and higher ranked and had been playing better than Louisville by, pretty much any metric. The offense had been completely rolling. Now, this raises the question on the Clemson side where, is it just because you're playing bad teams? Because now you beat App State. Okay, App State's terrible. You beat NC State. They're kind of terrible. Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia. The only 2 good teams Clemson has faced, they've lost, and the offense has struggled. And now you've got, even if you win out, which you win at Virginia Tech on the road, at Pitt, and you beat South Carolina at home. Those would be your 3 best wins of the season. Then you have the Citadel in there. Even if you went out, though, at 10-2, I don't think that resume is good enough to get in as an at-large to the college football playoff, most likely, right? I think you need some help and some crazy things to happen, or you need SMU or Miami to drop a game and you to get into the ACC title and a chance to get the, automatic berth. But this was a huge loss for Clemson and what I really did not see coming. And I think Louisville's a good team. I like their quarterback, Tyler Shuck. I thought the offense was good and would put up points. But their defense, I thought, really struggled, and I did not think they'd be able to shut down a Clemson offense that was 4th in the nation in points per game. They barely escaped Boston College last week. I really did not see this coming. I thought every advantage was with Clemson. I thought Clemson had been rolling and was going to keep rolling off the bye. And this one, I mean, this might have ended Clemson's playoff hopes, and that's just really shocking to see. Moving on, we have more game analyses, and I'm going to do Florida, Georgia, where Georgia was able to win 34-20, and this went pretty much exactly like I said it was going to play out. I said this was going to be a competitive game throughout, and then Georgia was going to take the lead late and then tack on a late touchdown, and I had them winning by 15. They end up winning by 14, but pretty much exactly what I said in the predictions video is what happened, because I didn't think Georgia was going to be fully focused. I know it's the big rivalry game, world's largest cocktail party, but coming off that win against Texas and having Ole Miss and Tennessee coming up, Georgia, this team, it seems like they don't play their best game every weekend, which is dangerous, but I thought they would do it this weekend and get away with it. But the thing you got to talk about is they might not have, if Florida hadn't gotten, if DJ Lagway had not gotten hurt. He was playing pretty well. He's really good with deep shots downfield, and Florida had already taken the lead into halftime, but you had to play the third-string quarterback the whole second half, transfer from Yale, and Florida's offense was just not dynamic enough to ever really feel like they could beat Georgia from that point on. If Lagway had played the full game, maybe Florida could have actually pulled a huge upset. I don't personally. I don't think they would have, because it felt like this Georgia team just kind of would have played a little bit better then. But yeah, that was a huge injury, and kind of it sapped some of the energy out of this potential upset. Because even when this game was 20-20 after the tie in the fourth quarter, I was like, there's no way Florida's going to win this game. Except the only part of me was like, if Carson Beck throws another interception, which transitions us to our next point really well, which is we got to talk about Carson Beck. Pretty much after the Alabama game, throwing 3 interceptions, he's had 2 huge games, and he threw 3 interceptions in both of those. He has a hat trick of hat trick interception games. 3 against Bama, 3 against Texas, 3 against Florida. Sure, they beat Texas and Florida, but he's got to protect the ball. This Ole Miss team can force some turnovers. This Tennessee defense in a couple weeks is really good. He can't throw 3 interceptions again in those games. He's got to take care of the ball better. If Georgia's going to go on to win, SEC title, a national title, things they want to do, he can't keep being so careless with the football. And that's just what I wanted to say on the Georgia side. But yeah, the most impressive teams from the weekend were number 3, Texas Tech. You could argue they were surprising, but I had Iowa State as the second most likely upset alert. I thought the spread was too big at 14.5 because Texas Tech was a good team and their quarterback was coming back. I think they would have beat TCU if their quarterback didn't get knocked out last week. So I think they were a 5-3 team, but in my mind, it's like you're kind of like you weren't 6-2, but you're that caliber of team. If that makes sense, because I think the TCU game they would have won if they had the team that was playing Iowa State yesterday. And the offense with Taj Brooks, Josh Kelly, pretty good at wide receiver, and Brooks obviously the running back, and Morton healthy, playing well. I thought they could challenge Iowa State. Now, because it was on the road and Iowa State had been finding ways to win close games with Rocco Beck playing well in the clutch, and their receivers making big plays and such, I didn't think they'd be able to win this game. But how it played out is Rocco Beck did make the big play. He just left too much time on the clock, and Texas Tech was able to go down the field, basically leave no time on the clock, and win the game. And that was impressive to me because anytime you win on the road against a team I had probably in the top 10, that's really impressive. But number 2 is the SMU Mustangs, who rolled Pittsburgh 48-25, but it was 34-3 at halftime, and they wrapped this one up quick. It was over almost from the get-go. They were just running down Pitt's throat. Pitt couldn't do anything to stop them and couldn't really get any offense going until the second half. Pitt couldn't run the ball. Pitt's defense wasn't forcing turnovers like he did in the Syracuse game. Wasn't stopping the run very well. Holstein struggled at quarterback, and overall it looked like Pitt was nowhere near SMU's level, and kind of exposed Pitt as kind of a fraudulent 7-0, having got wins against not the best competition. SMU looks like a legit contender to win that ACC right now. Now, things could change quickly. We just saw Clemson, but they have a manageable schedule. I know Virginia on the road is maybe like their toughest game left, so pretty workable. You would expect it's at least a decent chance they make the ACC title. I don't want to say I expect anything because I might be picking an upset on their schedule still. And, if you get there, you're one game away from getting the automatic berth, and they're potentially setting themselves up to get an at-large bid, with their only loss being to a still undefeated BYU team by only 3 points. I think it was 18-15 way back in the start of the year. So really impressive by them. On the Pittsburgh side, yeah, they're not a top-level team. Like I said, and number 1's got to be the Ole Miss Rebels, putting up 63 on Arkansas. Jackson Dart and Watkins breaking, just every SEC record. I thought after, maybe the third touchdown, Arkansas would stop, leaving Watkins wide open for 50-yard touchdowns, but they decided against it. They thought they'd still leave him open. Dart with 515 yards, 6 touchdowns. Watkins with 250-something yards, 5 touchdowns. Absolutely insane numbers from this game. And they pulled them, right? They could have put up more. They called off the horses in this one. And Arkansas's offense wasn't terrible. Taylor Green dealt with some injuries in this game. But just if someone's pointing that out, injuries to Taylor Green was not what Arkansas's problem was in this game. For anybody who thought, if Taylor Green was in this game, Arkansas could have put up 60-something, They could not have. It was just this defense for Arkansas could not cover Ole Miss receivers, and Trey Harris wasn't even playing. And this makes you, the way Georgia played this week, the way Ole Miss played, you're looking at that Ole Miss game saying Trey Harris is healthy and these receivers are going, and Dart plays well. This offense is pretty electric. Could put up some points on a Georgia secondary that we saw get beat over the top by Florida. Ole Miss has that potential as well, and this Ole Miss defensive line is playing really well. We've seen guys like Ivy stepping up. Walter Nolan's still very good. There's other guys as well. And then, Perkins. So the defense is playing better. It seems like a team peaking at the right time. And huge game for them. Basically, season on the line against Georgia next week. Going to be a huge game. But they were my most impressive team for the weekend. Other games to talk about before we wrap it up. Oregon was able to beat Michigan. And I thought this was actually pretty impressive. I considered putting it most impressive because Michigan played probably I've watched every Michigan game this year. Either their first or second best game they played all year was this week. I think you could argue the USC game they played better because of how well they ran the ball and with Khalil Mullings, and the defense, the pass rush especially was really good, and Will Johnson was making plays at corner. But considering they didn't have Will Johnson, the defense wasn't terrible against Oregon. Now, they weren't great, but Oregon has a really good offense. And Davis Warren played probably the best game he's played, made more throws than he's been able to, and Colston Loveland played probably his best game. So the Michigan overall, at home in a big spot, played closer to like a top 25 level Michigan team that I that I definitely expected going into the season. And Oregon was still able to win fairly comfortably, which was pretty impressive. Dylan Gabriel comes close. I don't think he broke the record. I think he's like one away from the all-time touchdown record. I could be wrong about that though, but continues his like Heisman campaign in that top four, like Genty, Hunter, Cam Ward. Big win for Oregon. Then Miami over Duke. Speaking of Heisman campaigns, Cam Ward for another 400-yard game, puts up 53 points after they go down 28-17. Just rattles off like 5 straight touchdowns, doing his Zombieland dance, and it was all Miami from there. This Miami team, highly suspect in the secondary, but we've seen that this year. They can get beat. They'll allow huge explosive plays, even from Duke. No offense to Duke, but yeah, I still think Miami's going to go undefeated. I still think they'll probably win the ACC and be a top 2 or 3 seed in the tournament. But from that point, that's after that bye, they get the wrong team. They can definitely get exposed in the tournament. I'm rooting for them. I like Cam Ward. I like Miami, but that secondary is just so suspect. Cam Ward's gonna have to put up like at least 40 in the playoff, I would imagine, to win the first game. Then Tennessee beats Kentucky. Another lackluster first half from Tennessee, putting up only 7 points, trailing at halftime, and then plays better in the second half, wins the game. Pretty much what we've seen from them so far this year. And I think at this point, I think if you were holding out hope this offense was going to take that step to look more like a Josh Heupel offense so that they could be, a potential SEC title or national title contender, I don't think it's happening. They're still very live to make the playoff, probably favored to make the playoff right now. But they have tough games still against Georgia and Vanderbilt. Definitely losable if the offense continues to struggle to this degree, which it's looking like it might. Then Baylor beats Baylor beats TCU in what was a really good game. Came down to the wire. Really fun one. Not a lot of Big 12 implications. Just a really good game that Baylor is able to win. Then ASU beats Oklahoma State and beat them by like 21. Another fun game. I like seeing Scadaboo. Didn't really catch much of this one after the delay, but it was fun to watch for the first part. So our biggest takeaways from the weekend, to wrap it up, number 3, I think the SEC is far from finished. We now have A&M at 1 loss, Georgia at 1 loss, Texas at 1 loss, Tennessee at 1 loss. And if you look at those, Texas A&M still has to play Texas, Tennessee still has to play Georgia, so 2 of those teams will get a second loss. Then Georgia also has the Ole Miss game, Tennessee also has the Vandy game. And then you could see teams like Alabama or LSU, whoever wins that game next week, get back into this thing. Missouri, maybe. I doubt it, but I think they still only have 2 losses, so they could maybe get back into it. Ole Miss, only 2 losses. So I think this thing's far from finished. I think there's a lot of big games left in the SEC. It's going to be really fun to see who's able to get into that conference title game. I don't really know how it's going to play out right now. I still if you ask me right now, I have Georgia in there. and I'd probably have Texas in there. But I'm not very confident at all the way Georgia played, and Texas. I'm a little skeptical of Texas right now as well. Number 2, Miami and BYU are in control. And I mean, Iowa State no longer undefeated. Pitt no longer undefeated. Clemson drops a game. Kansas State drops a game. And now Miami and BYU look like locks to make the college football playoff. Or at least they look like locks to make their conference championship games, especially Miami, like their toughest game left, Syracuse. BYU, I think, is a little tougher because you have ASU remaining, which is a tough game. You have Utah. But Utah is not as good as they were supposed to be with Cam Rising being gone. So both these teams should make it to their conference championship games. BYU still has 4 games, Miami only 3. And if you're already there, undefeated at this point in the season, you're in great position to make the college football playoff. I put should before everything because you can never be too sure about anything happening in college football in November. But they're definitely in control of their own destiny and look increasingly likely to make the college football playoff as 2 of the only remaining unbeaten teams. And finally, Penn State did not make the jump. I talked about this. Andy Kotelnicki is supposed to bring life to the offense. Drew Aller, take the leap. You've been building to this year with Abdul Carter, Danny Sutton, the running backs, Aller. You bring in Fleming from the portal. You have Ohio State at home. You're undefeated. You're ranked higher. You're 3rd in the country. It was all there, and they couldn't make the jump. The offense fell flat for the most part. Again, just couldn't make the big enough plays. You see struggles at receiver, not making that catch in the end zone leads to the interception. You see struggles on the defensive front, not being able to stop the run against a makeshift offensive line. You see struggles on the offensive line in the run game, not being able to punch it in at the end to potentially send the game or give them a chance to send it to overtime. Just pretty much all the facets of the game, Penn State fell short of taking that leap, and their season's not over. They'll still probably make the college football playoff. But in my opinion, this game showed they're still not there in terms of top-level team. They're still not top-level contenders. They're probably not going to make the Big Ten title. They'll probably be like an 8, 9, 10 seed in the college football playoff. Probably go out in round 1 or win 1 playoff game and then lose to a top team. And I think Penn State fans are going to be disappointed from that. Obviously, a lot of programs, that'd be an awesome season for them. But when you've been knocking at the door for so long, you want to break it down at some point, and they still didn't do that. Well, that's my full analysis and takeaways from Week 10. Later this week, we'll do a college football playoff ranking. What should they look like? And then we'll react to how they come out, see what the committee gets right, what they get wrong. Make sure to leave a like, do me a huge favor, and subscribe. I thank you all for watching. Until next time.